The galaxy had its fair share of empty promises, but nothing compared to the quiet just before a ship plummeted out of orbit. Commander Rylan Ward didn't feel fear not yet. He'd trained for every imaginable disaster over 20 years in the Galactic Concord. But the one thing they couldn't teach was how to breathe, while strapped to a burning metal coffin that was falling toward a battlefield. The ship a reconnaissance. Frigate called the Vanguard, Echo shuddered. As the atmosphere of Verox 4 ripped across its hull, every alarm blared at once. Red light strobed through the fractured glass of the forward visor, illuminating smoke and terrified faces. It was supposed to be a simple scan mission, a sneaky overflight. Nothing more than the stealth systems flickered, and someone down there saw them. Brace for impact. Rylan shouted over the screams of pressurized metal. The voices of the crew blared through static from the CUM station. 6 beings, all trained in field observation, strapped in their seats and helpless. Except Rylan human, and supposedly the most fragile among them. The ship struck the ground. Metal buckled. The cockpit rotated. Rylan's vision smeared sideways as force hammered through his suit. His shoulder ignited with pain. Then nothing but ringing silence. Smoke poured through a ruptured seal when Rylan pulled himself out of the cracked harness. He fell, bracing on his hands, coughing in the desert air. Heat radiated from the collapsed ship, dull orange flames licking up through torn hull plates. He staggered upright around him. The wreck slowly came alive. One by one, the crew stumbled out. Alon, the pale-scaled navigator. Tavod, the striped feline scout. And 3 Serix, all furred, long-eared, and barely conscious. All except Rylan had bodies built for cold climates. Their homeworlds were forests of shadow and frost. But Varix 4 was a desert, a war-ravaged desert. Tava, limping out last, gestured at the horizon, voice trembling as she used her translator implant. A battlefield. We crashed in the middle of one. Rylan turned. The sky was bruised by distant trails of smoke. Artillery rumbled like a god beating on the doors of the world, and the only cover was the broken ship already visible from miles away. Not a rescue, beacon a target. Alon the Scaled One grabbed Rylan's arm, his voice panicked and pitched high. What do we do now? Orders, Commander. We are in a dead zone. This place is death. Rylan didn't answer immediately. He looked around at the Crew 6 aliens staring at him with raw fear. As if their only lifeline was the single human on board human. The galaxy never entirely understood humans. Too unpredictable. Too emotional. Too stubborn to die. Rylan drew a sharp breath, shoulders rising, and for a heartbeat he lifted his gaze to the sky. Smoke parted like a torn curtain. Stars burned far above, even in daylight. He whispered without thinking. It wasn't luck we survived. What? Rylan shook his head. Nothing. Just thinking out loud. But his words lingered. Someone wanted us to live. He wasn't sure if he believed it, but right then, steadied his nerves. The wreckage groaned as they pulled out equipment and supplies. Fire spat and metal shrieked, but Rylan kept the crew moving. Everyone packs food and water, he said, throwing open a survival crate. Emergency locator beacons, stay off for now. We don't want to broadcast our location until we're clear of the battlefield.
Ava grunted,
coughing through smoke. We can't stay here. No, Rylan didn't soften it. This ship is visible. A strike drone sees it. We're all dead. Rylan moved with steady purpose, rifling through compartments and shared crates. The aliens followed, some shaky, some still rattled with panic. But they worked. Rylan made sure they did. By the time the sun began shifting from white to yellow, they had packs filled water rations, compressed nutrient gel, med kits, and basic tools. Rylan looked at the crew, then nodded ahead. We move north. There's a ridge under that horizon. That rock gives shade and elevation. If we get high ground, a sudden thunder shook the ground. Cutting him off, they turned far beyond the desert. Explosions bloomed. The war hadn't stopped. It was coming closer. They walked. The alien crew suffered. Ryland didn't. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't even thinking about it. But 2 hours in, Alan hissed through parched teeth. "Itch, how are you not dying?" From the heat. Ryland had rolled his sleeves up hours ago. Sweat poured down his skin, evaporating into the dry air. The others stared at the dripping water with disbelief, even disgust. "You're leaking," Tava said, wincing under the sun. "Your skin is spilling out liquid," Ryland said. "Sweat." The Sarek males stared with wide black eyes. "Your species leaks on purpose?" Ryland shrugged. "Helps us cool down. Keeps us alive in conditions like this." Tava paused in the sand to catch her breath. "You carry more weight than any of us. You walk ahead, and you don't collapse you, just leak water and keep going. That's the gist of it." He didn't mention the truth. He wasn't comfortable. He was barely holding up. His entire body was on fire inside its own skin, muscles screaming with every step. But humans didn't give up. Not when someone needed them. Not when no one else could carry the load. The Sareks whispered among themselves, frustrated, jealous, and scared. But they kept walking. No one dared stop. Not with artillery getting louder behind them. By the time they reached a broken formation of red stone rising from the dunes, crew staggered into its shadow and collapsed. Ryland was sweating through 2 layers of uniform, chest heaving, but he still helped each of them find shade before he sat down. Tava, choking on exhaustion, looked up at him. "You don't stop. You don't break. Why?" Ryland leaned back against the stone, eyes half closed. He almost said training. He almost said habit. But instead he murmured something he hadn't said out loud in years. "Someone's watching over us." Alan blinked. "A surveillance ship?" "No," Ryland said softly. "Something bigger." None of them understood, but they heard the conviction, and something about it steadied the silence. Just as the crew started to recover, the sound broke the calm. Engines, multiple, getting closer. "Hovercraft." Military Ryland shot to his feet. The others followed, muscles still raw, bodies still weak. "Move," he barked. "All of you dupper into the rocks." The aliens ran first, stumbling and scrambling into the narrow stone corridors. Ryland stayed behind, watching the ridgeline, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. He wasn't thinking about survival anymore. Something else kicked in. Responsibility. Duty. Faith. "We're not dying here," he muttered. "Not today." Then he turned and sprinted into the shadows after his crew. What the crew doesn't know, the hovercraft are already scanning the ridge. One of the aliens is planning to betray the group for a faster rescue. The desert was a living thing. It breathed heat and exhaled silence. Sand shifted with memories of battles fought 100 times and burned bodies buried under drifting dunes. Ferox 4 was a graveyard that just hadn't been excavated yet. The crew moved deeper into the stone crevices, climbing over cracked slabs of red rock baked by a sun with no mercy. Ryland led them, every sense alert. By the time they reached the shaded center of the formation, they stopped, hearts hammering, water rationed. Language barriers sharpened by fear. Tava, Itha-striped scout, leaned against a wall and steadied. Herself with clawed fingertips, her fur stuck to her face. That engine sound. Are they pursuing? Alan, the reptilian navigator, took a slow breath, then shook his head. No. Hovercraft engines travel far in open terrain. But they are scanning. I can feel it, Ryla nodded. Military search pattern. They're sweeping the desert for crash survivors. U.S., Tava asked. No, he answered grimly. The other faction. They think we're them. Alan's eyes narrowed. We need them to not find us. Ryland didn't disagree. If they were captured by either side in this civil war, they'd be tagged as spies and arrogated, imprisoned, or worse, they didn't belong to either army. They just had the misfortune of falling between them. They spent the next hour securing the immediate area. There were narrow tunnels in the rock, hollowed out by centuries of wind erosion, enough space for temporary shelter, enough shadow to hide the crew from drones. No signs of predators. No animal tracks. But one thing bothered Rylan, the Syrinx, the three-furred. Long-eared males hadn't spoken to him since reaching the shelter. They set their gear down near each other, whispered among themselves, kept distance from the rest of the group, some kind of tribal huddle. Rylan didn't take it personally. He was human. They weren't. He wasn't expecting trust, but he was expecting logic. And right now, logic said they couldn't afford division. He was about to address them when Alan approached him, eyes full of quiet panic. "I intercepted a signal," he said under his breath. Rylan stiffened. "From the hovercraft?" "No, from our ship." "Someone activated a distress beacon." Rylan's heart sank. "Inside the wreck?" "No," Alan said, voice tightening. "A portable transmitter." "Someone here." "One of us set it off." Rylan's jaw clenched. "Who has access to field beacons?" Alan swallowed. "All of us." Standard protocol. That meant every surviving crew member carried one. Rylan already knew who did it. One of the Surd. Someone was trying to force a rescue. But not from the Federation. From the forces hunting the desert. Rylan gathered everyone into a loose circle beneath the rocks. Sun-splashed shadows pooled around their feet. "No one leaves this formation alone," he said. "No one sends a signal without telling the group first." "Someone activated a distress beacon, and that means those hovercraft are coming here now." Syrinx stared back, defensive and silent. Teva lifted her chin. "Only a fool would think local soldiers will treat us better than an off-world enemy." "No," said Rylan, "only someone desperate." Alan lowered his voice. "Someone who still believes rescue is rescue, no matter the uniforms." Rylan studied their faces. Syrinx didn't sweat like humans, but stress still showed. Twitching ears. Rapid eye blinks. Claws half extended. He saw it on one of them more than the others. Jarrus, the tallest Sarah, couldn't meet his eye, and that was enough. Rylan approached him slowly. "Evenly, you turned it on," he said. Silence. Jarrus's ears twitched. His hands curled. "Then, we're dying here. No one's dead yet. You don't understand war, human. We've lived through planetary conflicts before. There is no such thing as neutral in a war zone. We'll be captured no matter where we run. Better to be found now and negotiate." Rylan stared back, voice quiet and dangerous. "You didn't negotiate with us? 'Cause we weren't negotiating," Jarrus snapped. "We were surviving." "If the wrong soldiers arrive," Rylan answered, "we're not prisoners. We're evidence." Before they could argue further, the sound returned. Engines. Closer. The hovercraft again, but this time, not passing by. Stopping. Alan jerked toward the opening. They've landed. Rylan's brain shifted instantly into survival mode. Tunnels. Everyone inside. Now. There was no time to argue. The rock formation they'd chosen wasn't a fortress. It was a sieve. A maze with multiple entry points. If the soldiers spread out and started clearing compartment by compartment, they'd be cornered. One by one, the crew slid into a narrow crevice that branched deep into the rock. Small enough to hide them. Deep enough to give them silence. They crouched in pitch darkness, hearing only the pulse of blood in their ears. Then the outside world erupted with sound boots, barked orders, equipment, metal clicks. Voices in an alien language. Amplified by helmets and comms filters. The hovercraft had arrived. Tava's claws scraped against the stone in panic. Alan pressed both hands to his temple, trying to stay still. Jarrus whispered, voice shaking, "I didn't know they'd come so fast." Rylan leaned close, murmuring in an icy whisper, "That's why you don't gamble with people's lives." Outside. A soldier shouted something in a harsh dialect. Second voice answered. Then a massive blast cracked the rock. The entrance tunnel shook. Sand fell. Tava let out a short, choked sound. Alan froze. Jarrus's eyes went wide with terror. Rylan didn't move. He was still, silent. They're clearing the rocks with weapons fire, he realized. Not searching, dash flushing, which meant ... They had no Intention of taking prisoners? The group stayed frozen until the next explosion rattled the stone walls. Voices rose outside. Orders barked. More engines. Metal scraping rock. They weren't leaving. They were preparing to breach. Alan whispered shakily. They're scanning crevices. The moment they find heat signatures, Rylan already knew the truth. That transmitter had brought them here? And now, every moment spent waiting was a moment closer to death. He pulled his pack forward. Moving quietly, opening the emergency seal. Inside, one volatile device. A compact shock charge, Federation-made, capable of collapsing rock to seal off tunnels or seal in attackers. He stared at it for a moment. The crew needed a miracle. He only had a weapon, which meant he needed something more. He needed faith, not blind hope. But belief that one impossible thing might still happen, that the desert wasn't the end of their story. He closed his eyes briefly, whispered into the darkness. Not luck. Not chance. Don't abandon us now. Tava looked at him confused. You're praying? Rylan didn't open his eyes. I don't pray because I expect something. I pray because I believe someone is listening. None of them understood the words not really, but they heard the conviction. They felt the calm. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was madness. Or maybe it was strength they didn't have on their own. Outside, footsteps scraped just meters away. They're approaching the crevice. Rylan opened his eyes. Jaw tightening, he leaned close to the others and whispered, When I move, you move. No sound, no hesitation. Alan swallowed. Where are we going? Rylan lifted the shock charge. Somewhere they'll never follow. He reached toward the stone wall and pressed the trigger. The blast doesn't just seal the tunnel, it opens one. And what's on the other side isn't safety. It's something buried for centuries. The explosion was not loud. It was deep, a low, bone-soaking rumble that shook the rock formation from the inside out. Dust rained from the ceiling. A surge of pressure rolled through the tunnels like a wave of invisible weight. No one screamed. No one breathed. And then there was silence. Rylan pressed himself flat against the tunnel wall as the shock charge detonated. He waited for the cascade of falling stone to settle. A half-second. 1 breath. 2. Then the sound changed. The ceiling above them shifted, not collapsing, but splitting as if the rock had been waiting centuries for a reason to fracture. Chunks fell. A new opening appeared overhead, spilling pale sunlight and red sand into the chamber like a wound being torn open. Alan looked up with horror. What did you do? Rylan set his jaw. I didn't collapse the tunnel, pointed upward. I opened a way out. Dust and grit still fell around them like powdered time. The opening wasn't large, just narrow enough to squeeze through, but beyond it pale sky and scorching daylight. And more importantly, no soldiers. No engines. No barking orders, just open desert. The Sarek stared, stunned. Jarrus the betrayer looked afraid for a different reason now. You could have buried all of us alive, he whispered. I could have, Rylan agreed. But death wasn't the problem we needed to solve. He turned and began, climbing the slanted debris before anyone could. Object. We needed a path.
Alan?
Emerged first into a pocket of sand cut off from the main battlefield. The land here sloped into a canyon-scored valley behind the rock formation, hidden from the wide-open desert. The hovercraft were sweeping. It was exactly the kind of terrain the scanners wouldn't be calibrated for. The others climbed out one by one, beginning with the light-bodied Alan and the agile Tava when the Sareks followed last, their fur still dusted with rock powder. They didn't meet Rylan's eyes, not out of defiance this time, out of shame. They stood under the hard Varrock sun, the sky stripped of clouds, wind rising like a breath from the sand. Now what? Alan asked quietly. Rylan scanned the valley. No drone tracks. No hover signatures. The canyon was deep enough to provide cover, winding enough to break line of sight. They had options. Finally, he pointed toward the valley's shadowed edge. We follow that cut until sunset. Then continue by night. No heat. No scanner glare. Dava's striped head twitched. And the soldiers? They'll search the rocks, Rylan said. Find nothing except dust, heat shadows, and the hole we left. Fried from the blast? Alan breathed carefully, almost reverently. You solved every problem at once. Rylan shook his head. No, just the ones we could see. He didn't mention the feeling in his chest, the sense that something bigger had taken the wheel in those last seconds before he pressed the trigger. A quiet voice in the back of his mind that said, if you move, I'll clear the path. Faith was strange like that. You didn't call it. You recognized it when it arrived. They walked. The canyon was cooler than open desert. Shaded by jagged cliffs, carved by ancient water. The sand here was tinted red, mixed with salt deposits that had crystallized into pale white veins across the stone. It crunched beneath their boots and paws in a way that felt unnatural. Too sharp. To clean Rylan's nerves prickled. Alan noticed it too. This is fossil salt, he said. There must have been water here once. An old riverbed. Riverbeds don't leave this much residue unless the water was trapped here for millennia, Rylan said. Tava slowed as she inspected the canyon wall. Something had caught her Aja pattern etched into the stone. Commander, she said quietly, these are not natural formations. Rylan came closer. The wall wasn't just layered. It was carved. Lines crossed at angles too precise for erosion. Rounded shapes where fingers had shaped stone. And deeper than that symbols, digits, shapes, an ancient alphabet, a settlement, Alan breathed. A forgotten one. Tava traced her claws lightly through the dust. Abandoned. Buried. That blast didn't just open the way out of the rocks. It exposed this place. Which meant something else. They weren't the first ones here. Rylan exhaled slowly. We're walking through ruins. Ancient, unmapped, untouched. The canyon deepened. The sand thinned. Rock gave way to unexpected tile broken in places, but unmistakably shaped by civilization. A platform. A landing. A forgotten floor. The Syrinx exchanged uneasy looks. Their ears flicked involuntarily. This is wrong, murmured Veon, the quietest of the three. I can feel it. Rylan did too. Not danger. Not yet, but presence. Something older than all of them had once held power here. The air still remembered it. The path narrowed again before opening into a hollowed space beneath the canyon. A wide half-circle of worked stone, lined with shapes that had once been pillars. In the center, a rectangular slab. Black, clean, even after centuries. A table. An altar? A memorial? No one spoke for several long breaths. Alan broke the silence. This isn't a war remnant. This is pre-colonial. Tava crouched, eyes locked on the slab. It's not Federation. Not even pre-Federation local. I've studied architecture across 12 sectors and nothing matches this design.
Alan
Felt it too. A tension in the air. The quiet kind. Like a held breath, he stepped toward the slab. Commander Alan warned, but Rylan ignored him. One hand reached out. His fingers brushed the black surface, and something moved beneath it. Not a sound. Not a vibration. A presence. A soft pulse, like the beating of a second heart. Rylan jerked back, breath catching. The others recoiled instinctively. What happened? Tava hissed. Rylan was silent for a full 5 seconds before speaking. It's not just a slab. There's something under it. Something active. Alan blinked rapidly. Alive? No, Rylan shook his head. Waiting. Tava's tail flicked in alarm. Alan took a step back. Even the Syrinx retracted their claws. Only Rylan remained still. Staring into the quiet stone like it was a mirror? He didn't understand the feeling. But he recognized the weight. It wasn't fear, or danger, or energy. It was purpose. Buried, dormant, patient. He turned back to the crew. We camp here, he said sharply. No one touches the structure. No one approaches it alone. Tava narrowed her eyes. You think it's dangerous? I think it was built on purpose, Rylan replied. And things built for purpose don't lose that purpose just because time passes. He paused, and because whatever it was, someone spent a lot of effort to hide it. They set up shelter in the open space between two broken walls. Pack structure. Water ration. Low conversation. But the space didn't relax with them. The canyon was still, like the ground itself held breath. Rylan sat alone on a slanted broken tile. His gaze rested on the black slab in the center. He thought of the crash, the blast, the tunnel opening, the canyon waiting for them. He thought of the prayer he spoke moments before triggering the charge, and he thought of the words he'd said aloud. Someone wanted us to live. Was that just survival instinct? Or something more? Rylan had never been a priest, never preached to anyone, but quiet belief was still belief, and in places where logic broke, it was all he had left. He looked at the stone again. No one digs this deep unless they're hiding something sacred, he murmured. Tav heard him from across the camp. Sacred, you mean? Religious? Rylan didn't answer for a moment. Sacred didn't always mean holy. Sometimes it just meant guarded. Because it mattered. Because someone believed it should be kept from unworthy hands. He finally said, I don't know what it is. But I know it's not just old. It's protected. Night fell. The canyon chilled beneath the stars. A cool wind swept through the valley, stirring sand and nerves. The crew slept fitfully, one by one, except Rylan. He kept first watch. An hour passed, then something happened. The slab in the center pulsed, again a faint glow under the stone. Like blue veins waking up, he stood, alert, muscles rigid. The slab wasn't just holding. Something it was listening. He took one step toward. It then, too, the glow brightened. The sand at its base stirred, just as Rylan reached out again, he froze. A low sound rose from the stone, not mechanical, not natural. A heartbeat. The ancient structure awakens and something buried begins reaching for whoever is still alive in the canyon. The heartbeat wasn't loud. It wasn't even sound, not in the normal sense. It was something felt vibrating through the soles of Rylan's boots, rising through the layered stone beneath his feet. A slow, patient pulse, like something vast and ancient, had woken up just enough to breathe once. Then it stopped. The air flattened. The canyon fell silent again. Too silent, like even the wind was waiting. Rylan stood over the midnight black slab in the center of the ruined chamber, its thin line of starlight cutting across its polished surface. The stone looked no different than before. No cracks, no flicker of movement, no glow visible anymore. But Rylan had felt it. That heartbeat wasn't imagined. And it wasn't from anything alive in the biological sense. It was a signal. A call. A confirmation. Something beneath this stone was not passive. It was alert. Rylan began stepping back, slowly, like a diver pulling out of deep water. The rest of the crew slept under the ragged arch of a crumbled wall, except one. Tava was awake. A hunter by nature, she slept lightly, and now she watched him in the starlit half-darkness. Her feline eyes glowed faintly as she stood up. You heard something? She said, padding toward him. I didn't hear it, Rylan replied. I felt it. She looked past him toward the slab, then around the canyon. No one else woke. It wasn't sound. Rylan sat down on a piece of shattered tile. Teva crouched across from him. A moment passed between the Mahunta recognizing another. What do you think it is? She asked. He hesitated, choosing his words. Whatever's down there. It's not dead. And it's not inert. It's waiting for something. Maybe for someone. A long silence stretched between them. You sound like you think it's conscious, she said. Rylan shook his head. Not alive the way we are. But not just a machine either. I don't think it's intelligence. I think it's purpose. Like a weapon waiting for its trigger. Tevea's whiskers twitched. If it's a weapon, why bury it? Rylan looked up, eyes narrowing at the fractured sky framed by canyon walls. "That's the thing," he said quietly. "Some weapons get buried because they're too powerful to destroy." It was 2 hours past midnight when the others began waking. They gathered near the camp's edge, shivering from desert chill, now that the heat of the sun was gone. The Syrinx, Jarrus, Ven, and Narek padded sleepily toward the group. Alan emerged last, his body stiff from cold. Only one face showed more fear than fatigue. 8 and single quotes. He sat beside Rylan, rubbing his scaled arms for warmth. His eyes were wide, wired, and unsettled not from the temperature, but from what he'd been watching. "The slab," Alan said. "It changed during the night," Rylan nodded. "I felt it become active." Alan leaned in, voice shaky. "This isn't just buried architecture. This is pre-Federation. Maybe pre-planetary civilization. We're standing in ruins of something that predates documented history," Jarrus scoffed. "We're in the ruins of a dead world." "Who cares?" Alan didn't even look at him. His gaze stayed locked on Rylan. "Someone else knows what's down there. Someone spent real resources to bury this place and hide any trace of its existence." Now Jarrus's bravado shifted. His ears twitched back. Rylan stood. "We move at first light, no delays. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that someone else finds us." Narak frowned. "You think soldiers will come this far?" "Tunnels don't get blasted open by accident," Rylan replied. "Military scans, sensors, they'll come looking when they realize the rock formation collapsed from the inside. If they find us near this thing," Tava asked. Rylan's silence was answer enough. Dawn crept over the canyon edge in streaks of pink and gold. The crew quickly broke down camp and packed quietly. No one spoke of the stone. No one mentioned its pulse, or the feeling that something was watching, but there was tension in every shoulder. They had become, in a way, TRESPASSERS.AELN was the last to finish packing. But he stopped halfway through to look again at the slab, not with fear this time, but with something more human. Wonder. What if the Federation finds this place one day? He murmured. Rylan's voice was low. "Some things aren't meant to be found. For all we know, the universe is full of buried warnings like this." Alan looked at him, troubled. "And we just fell into one?" Rylan didn't answer. The question wasn't scientific. It was spiritual. They left the canyon by early morning, following the shadowed path to the north until the red rock gave way to more open terrain. Sand dunes rose in slow waves toward the horizon, but smoke from the battlefield had moved on. The desert was quiet, hollow. Vast Rylan led, keeping the sun at their backs. He set a controlled pace, steady but not grueling. He checked landmarks. He gauged wind shifts. He conserved water and energy without needing to vocalize instructions. A quiet leader is still a leader. Hours passed. The Syrinx began speaking again, though mostly to each other. Whispered words that carried unease, not defiance. Tava lingered close by Rylan's side, her ears tuned to sounds buried under wind. Alan traced lines in the sand with a stick, cataloging geological data to calm his nerves. No one looked back until the ground shook, just slightly. A tremor. Then a sound like thunder under the earth. They all stopped at once. Alan froze, eyes wide. That wasn't artillery. Rylan's jaw tightened. His voice was barely audible. It came from the canyon. Tava's fur bristled. The slab. Rylan nodded slowly. Something had awakened and they were no longer the closest living things to it. "We need high ground," Rylan ordered immediately. "Now, move." They sprinted, packs rattling, water sloshing, sand flying up behind them like the desert was shaking them off its skin. The dunes rose around them like wave after wave of golden tide. They climbed the nearest crest and threw themselves down behind it. Rylan pulled out binoculars and scanned the canyon. Nothing moved at first. Then something did. Flickered dark against the red rock. A shape. Emerging, long, segmented, metallic. A machine no-worse, a reactivated sentinel, its body uncurled from the canyon floor like a serpent rising from sleep. It moved with fluid precision, joints clacking softly.
Head scan in the air.
A guardian. Left here to protect whatever was buried below, Jarrus whispered, trembling. Gods. Rylan didn't look at him. Whatever that thing is, it wasn't built for us to understand. Tava stared at Rylan. What is it doing? The machine raised its head and pointed it toward the desert, toward them. Rylan didn't flinch. It's not just scanning. Swallowed the sand in his throat. It's tracking us. You're saying the thing? Under the stone is what controlling it? Narek stammered. No, Rylan said. It is it. He stood slowly, never taking his eyes off the machine. This wasn't a ruin. This was a vault. A sealed chamber with a sentry system designed to activate after disturbance. Tava's voice was tight. Then we woke it. Oh, Rylan replied. Someone buried it and hoped no one would wake it. Lon breathed shakily. But if this tech is ancient, why does it still function? There was a long moment of silence. Tava looked at Rylan. Human. You're believing something you haven't said yet, Rylan finally spoke. Because some things aren't just built. His voice was low, measured, and full of quiet certainty. Some things are meant. The Serix went pale. Alan blinked hard. Tava stared like she didn't want to understand. Rylan never raised his voice. He didn't need to. You don't bury power like that unless you're afraid of who might find it. And you don't build guardians unless you're protecting something dangerous. He finally turned back to the group. And we are alive right now because that vault didn't want us. Didn't want us. Alan echoed. No, Rylan said. It let us go. Atari swallowed. Then why send the machine after us now? Rylan met his gaze with a calm that didn't match the fear in the air. Maybe it wants to know where we're going. The machine follows, but it doesn't attack. It observes. And then the crew realizes they aren't the only ones being tracked in the desert. The machine did not rush. It didn't race across the sand like a predator chasing prey. It moved in an unbroken line, slow, efficient, and utterly steady. Segmented metal limbs lifted and lowered with perfect precision. Its eyes they could be called eyes flashed with brief pulses of electric blue as it scanned the desert. It was not hunting. It was watching. It's not gaining on us. Alan whispered as they stared from behind the top of a tall dune. But it's not falling behind either. Rylan kept binoculars raised, studying the metallic sentinel from a distance. It wants to keep us in sight. That tells me it's not on attack protocol, Tava hissed, her fur shifting in the wind. Not yet, Rylan didn't disagree. The others crouched low, trembling not from the machine's speed or violence, but from its calm certainty. It behaved like a device with infinite patience, and only one purpose. Jarrus clenched his jaw. Why didn't it activate the moment we touched the stone? Why now? Rylan lowered the binoculars slowly, because it needed time to assess. He glanced across the desert at the sentinel, which had paused halfway down the dune behind them. It stood motionless, head pointed straight toward them, tracking their heat, motion, sound. But assess what? Alan asked. Rylan looked at him, tired eyes hard. Whether we were something it was built to destroy, and Tava pressed. Rylan spoke the words like they weighed more than sand, and we passed. A ripple of unease spread through the crew. Past what? A test? A filter? A judgment? They didn't know, but they knew this. Something ancient beneath the canyon had evaluated them, and chosen to let them leave. But not alone. Their route shifted. They angled toward a line of fractured stone on the far horizon, another rock formation. One that might offer shade and cover. The terrain was open now, broken only by ripples of dune and stray metallic debris from long past battles. Hours passed, the sun climbed high, then began its descent toward the haze. The air shimmered. Heat gnawed at muscle and will. Water bled away from the skin. The sky stretched like bright metal. But The sentinel never stopped following, 23 meters behind, then 30, then 20-5, always the same distance. Like a shadow that refused to fall behind, Tava broke the silence first. It's tracking movement. We stop. It stops. We move. It moves. Whatever it is, it's reacting, not attacking. Alon nodded, wiping sweat from his scaled brow. A drone like that usually has combat directives, but this one, I don't think it was built just for war. Ryland didn't stop walking, didn't look back, but spoke with quiet certainty. It wasn't built for war. Then what? Alan began. It was built for judgment. The words fell like stones. The Sarek stared at him, horror growing behind their eyes. For judgment? Narek echoed. What kind of weapon judges? One that's older than weapons, Ryland said, voice low. One that wasn't made to win a war but to end one. The air shifted then, a new sound drifted. Across the dunes, distant engine noise, not the drone hum of hovercraft. This was deeper, rougher, older. A guttural growl of combustion engines, the kind used by surface transports in low-tech armies. Ryland's head snapped up. Get down. The crew threw themselves flat against the sand, tucking packs and limbs behind the crest of a dune. The sound grew louder, approaching from the east. Ryland brought out his binoculars again, and they're rolling across a long stretch of broken... This is a convoy. 6 vehicles. Hybrid armor plating. Canvas tops. Painted in matte desert camo. Each one manned by soldiers wearing field-grade helmets and simple respirators. Not Federation, not mercenaries either. These were locals, the Eastern faction. Tava whispered, recognizing the tan shoulder banners. Alan's eyes widened. The ones who shot us down? The convoy rumbled forward, leaving deep treads in the sand. The wind peeled back the layers of grit, making the vehicles look like they were rolling through smoke. They're not alone, Ryland said. What? Alan asked, following his gaze. Then he saw it too. Walking among the vehicles half. The height of the transports were 2 mechanized suits. Humanoid walkers with rifle-sized cannons attached to each forearm. The machines strode with slow, heavy motion each step, leaving deep indentations. The desert shook under their feet. These are, Tava hissed, eyes fearful, patrol suits. Infantry suppression units. Ryland's pulse quickened not from fear, but from calculation. The convoy was headed straight for the canyon they'd come from, which meant, they're not here for us, he said quietly. They're here for the ruins. Alan's pupils dilated. Someone detected the disturbance. They're coming to secure the vault. Ryland said nothing, but his mind was already moving. Someone knew the vault existed. Someone knew what was buried there. And someone was coming to make sure it stayed buried, or stayed under their control. The convoy drew closer. Then suddenly the lead vehicle jerked to a stop. The others halted behind it. The mechanized suits paused mid-step. Soldiers jumped out, weapons raised, scanning the dunes. A hush fell across the desert. Not wind. Not heat. Something else. Then the sentinel appeared over the dune. Not rushing. Not attacking. Just standing lit by sunlight like a relic. Every weapon in the convoy turned. Toward it at once. One of the soldiers barked a command. In his native tongue. Then another shouted something that made the others visibly tense. Alan translated in a whisper. He said, "It's real." Ryland's face hardened. This wasn't discovery. This was confirmation. Someone down there knew the ancient machine was real, had been searching for it, waiting for a tan now, was face to face with it. The sentinel didn't move. The soldiers didn't fire. The desert waited, then one of the mechanized suits raised its arm. The cannon mounted on it began to spin with growing power. Ryland's pulse jumped. He didn't think. He reacted. We need to move now.
What?
Jarrus hissed. They're not shooting us. Ryland pointed at the mechanized suits. That thing is an ancient sentinel. If that cannon fires and does any real damage, we don't have 10 minutes before whatever built it wakes up the rest of what's buried out here." Alan's face went pale. Tava shoved her pack forward. "Where do we go?" Ryland didn't hesitate. "To the ridge. The one with the high stone peak. It's the only fallback point that gives us visibility and cover. And the machine?" Narek asked, voice shaking. Ryland turned and looked behind them, not at the convoy, not at the mech suits, at their sentinel, still watching them. No expression, no emotion, no fear, just awareness. Ryland said only one thing: "It's coming with us." The crew ran. The sentinel followed. Behind them, the first shot exploded across the sand. The mechanized suit fires and the ancient sentinel answers. What happens next isn't combat. It's something like a warning and a countdown. The first shot ruptured the atmosphere. It wasn't just sound. It was force. Booming, burning, resonant. A shockwave of heat and pressure rolled across the desert as the mech suit's arm cannon discharged, sending a streak of molten plasma toward the lone sentinel standing in the dunes. The beam hit dead center, striking the ancient machine with enough power to melt. Steel plating. Punch through light armor. Vaporize exposed circuitry. That's what should have happened. Instead, the beam disappeared. It struck the sentinel's chest, rippling outward like water striking glass, dissolving in a silent burst of faint blue light before it could do damage. The machine didn't fall. It didn't crack. It didn't even stagger. It raised its head a fraction of an inch. Not offense. Not a retaliation. Recognition. The convoy fell silent. So did the desert. Even the wind seemed to pause. Ryland and the others were halfway up a dune when they turned to witness the impossible. "That beam was shielded," Ellen whispered. "It didn't deflect, it absorbed." Tava's ears flattened. "That's not tech I've ever seen." "It's not tech," Ryland said. His voice was grim, flat. "It's something older." The soldier operating the mechanized suit recalibrated and fired again, this time with a sustained blast. Same result. Same ripple. Same silent nullification. Then the sentinel moved. One limb shifted. A single step forward. The soldiers panicked, shouted, scrambled, raised rifles, re-aimed the cannons, and then it happened. Without warning. Without effort. Without sound. The sand beneath the convoy turned black, an expanding circle. As if the desert surface was suddenly scorched by an invisible heat flare. Wheels sank. Metal wind. Engines sputtered. Men screamed. The machines were not being attacked. They were being softened. The sentinel was giving them a message. "Stop on your next move." "I decide. Run," Ryland said. They did up the dune. Down the other side. Through the rippling gold waves of sand. The sky blazed above them, but something colder than heat was pushing at their heels. They weren't just fleeing pursuit anymore. They were fleeing a mistake. Alan's breaths came ragged. That field had destabilized the ground matrix. Like the sand lost structural cohesion. Tava was panting, but she understood. The sentinel didn't target their bodies. It targeted the land beneath them. A warning strike. Ryland grimaced. "Think of it as a final offer. They fire again. It buries them alive. Can it track us like that?" Alan asked. Ryland didn't look back. "It already is." The ridge they'd been aiming for now loomed ahead, jagged and uneven, its ledges casting deep shadows across a valley of fractured stone. The terrain ahead looked nothing like the canyon they'd just escaped. This place was broken, violent, violently natural, a scar in the desert. "Up there," Ryland ordered. "High point. It'll give us sightlines." They climbed. Boots, claws, and scaled feet scrambling across slanted rock. Water packs clanked. Sweat fell. The sentinel's unhurried pace in the distance didn't match the urgency they felt. But that only made it worse. A threat that doesn't chase is a threat that doesn't need to. The ridge rose around them, sharp stones slicing sunlight into shards. Ryland reached the crest and dropped to one knee, signaling the others to stay low. Alan crawled up beside him. The convoy was still visible in the distance, vehicles trapped in the darkened sand, wheels and hulls half sunk. The soldiers were shouting. The mech suits were struggling to lift their limbs, and the sentinel stood there watching. Double quotes, "You don't activate a Vault Guardian unless what you're guarding is worse than what's attacking," Rylan muttered. Alan looked at him sideways. "You think it's protecting us?" Rylan shook his head, gaze still locked on the machine. "I think it's protecting itself." Hours passed, the convoy stayed immobilized. The mech suits failed to lift. The soldiers eventually stopped trying to fire. They backed away, regrouped, set up a perimeter, but they didn't dare approach the sentinel. Again, that fact alone told Rylan something important. Those soldiers already knew about the ruins. They already feared them, and they'd hoped, as anyone would, that the stories were wrong, that nothing inside was still active. That time was the final victor over whatever ancient design had been buried there. But they were wrong. Wrong in the worst way a civilization could be. They had found something they could not defeat. Night fell again. The sentinel still had not moved, but neither had the stars. They hung above like silent watchtowers, cold and infinite. The crew took shelter beneath a sloping shelf of stone on the ridge. The air was freezing compared to the day's heat, forcing them to huddle closer than before. No one slept, not deeply, but they rested in shifts. Rylan stayed awake longest. He watched the desert, watched the sentinel, watched the mech suit's lights flicker as desperate engineers worked through the night to free them from deadened sand. Alan stirred beside him. "You look like someone carving meaning out of emptiness." Rylan didn't look away from the darkness. "No. I look like someone who realizes he's not the first person to walk this path." Alan blinked slowly. "But you feel something about it." "Yes." He finally turned toward the alien, to the only one on the crew who sometimes asked questions, instead of avoiding answers. "You ever look at something so old, so deliberate, that you knew instinctively it wasn't meant for decay?" Alan was quiet. "Once, in the ruins of Neterus 9, I studied a city that didn't erode properly under wind. The walls resisted time. Not by strength, by intent." He hesitated. "I felt like it was still waiting for something." Rylan nodded slowly. "Some places don't die." Lon's next words were soft. "You think the vault is still alive?" Rylan didn't hesitate. "I think it never stopped being alive." "Then why didn't it kill us?" Rylan looked back at the machine in the distance, the Guardian still silent, still unmoved. "Maybe?" He breathed, voice fading into the night. ... Because we weren't the threat." The dawn came sharp and quiet. The horizon bled orange into gold as the desert lit up again. Rylan gathered the group. "We're moving north-northwest," he said. "According to the star map, there's a ridge of metallic outcroppings, about 30 kilometers from here. If we can reach it, we can boost a signal and transmit safely." Tava frowned. "Won't that expose us to the same military forces?" Rylan nodded. "Yes, but not before we send a signal to the Federation. And this time we send it ourselves, not through a beacon someone can corrupt." Jarrus exhaled. In the Sentinel, Rylan's eyes drifted toward the desert. "It'll follow if it wants to, but we're not heading back toward the vault. That's not our fight." Alan glanced at the horizon, then back at Rylan. "You never expected to survive the crash, did you?" Rylan's voice was dry like the desert itself. "No, but someone did." Len blinked. "Someone?" Rylan didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, because at that exact moment, the Sentinel moved, not toward them, but toward the trapped convoy, and then it sank into the sand slowly, casually, as if the earth was opening just for it, a final warning, a silent reminder. The vault does not sleep, it waits, and those who trespass are not enemies, they are evidence. Rylan turned away. "We leave now." And as the crew began their long walk across the desert, none of them noticed the last detail. The sentinel disappeared completely, but the sand where it vanished continued to pulse like a heartbeat, The crew tries to reach the metallic ridge to send a distress call, but intercepted transmissions reveal they're not the only ones sending. The desert stretched in every direction like a silent clockage dune, a marker of time. Each shadow, a reminder of how long they had left before the heat took what the cold couldn't. Rylan led with a slow but certain stride. His pack felt heavier now, not because of its contents, but because of responsibility. The others followed in staggered formation. Conserving energy and water under the steady pull of Verox's sun, Alan had the field come scanner out, checking frequencies every hour. No signal yet. Dead air across nearly all bands. That gave them two choices. Reach the metallic ridgeware. Natural ionization might boost their equipment. Just long enough to get a signal. Out. Hope a Federation scout passed near this war-torn world by. Coincidence, Rylan wasn't one to gamble. He was built to act. But even so, he could feel a strange presence lingering in the back of his awareness, as if he were being observed by something more than the desert. Everyone felt different. Tavel walked closer to Ryla, no, not just because she respected him, but because she feared being further from him. The Serix kept their heads down, no longer whispering, their movements quiet. Their shame from earlier still heavy on them, and Alan watched the horizon not for safety, but with hungry curiosity. "I keep thinking about the vault," he said softly as they walked over a shallow rise. "About what we awakened, about why it looked dormant, but reacted with purpose." Rylan didn't slow his pace. It wasn't waiting for us, but it responded to us. "Yes," Rylan said, voice low. "Like we were an intrusion it couldn't ignore." Lynn hesitated. "What if it wasn't dormant until we arrived?" Tava frowned. "Wouldn't that suggest the vault knew we were coming?" Alan nodded. "Or that it's not just sensing presence." Rylan finally turned his gaze to meet the reptilian navigator's eyes. "You think it can sense thought? Think it can sense intention?" Alan said. Rylan didn't argue, because deep down a part of him had wondered the same. Then he remembered the nearest truth. Humans don't get chosen. They get tested. And if the vault was testing them, the real exam wasn't behind them. It was still ahead. An hour later, the desert changed. The dunes flattened out and thinned, revealing fractured soil and patches of metallic rock, glimmering like exposed circuitry beneath the sun. "There," Rylan said, pointing. "That's our ridge." Serix perked up. "It's real. We're not hallucinating." "No mirage," Rylan said. "Metallic mineral deposits. Probably iron, nickel, manganese, conductive. That's why our cums might work here." Alan knelt and touched the ground. His voice was a mix of wonder and suspicion. "This looks naturally formed, but the ore concentration is too uniform. Could it be artificial?" Rylan scanned the horizon again. "Does it matter?" Alan didn't answer, but it did matter. Everything on this planet was something else. Pretending to be something simple, Tava climbed a ridge of exposed iron first and signaled the others to join her. The metal surface was rugged but walkable, glimmering faintly under the sunlight like a dull blade. Alan knelt at the highest point and unfolded the cum array, linking it to his datapad. He extended the signal booster and tapped the power pad. No response. "Dead," he said. Rylan didn't flinch. "Try it with manual override." Alan pulled out a small bypass tool and pried the cover off the signal unit. He looked up. "It'll take some of the charge from our own packs." "Then drain mine first," Rylan said. "Do it," Alan did. The signal array lit up. A tone beeped. The display flashed. Band reclaimed. Transmission. Possible. But then something else appeared. N-bound signal detected. Origin. Unknown. Encryption. Broken. Message. Received. Alan's hands stalled. "That's impossible," he said. "Someone's already using this ridge." Rylan stepped beside him. "Open it." Steady as stone, Alan tapped the console. The message played, not voice, not audio. Just a text stream translated from another language in real time. "Unknown asset has awakened vault status, active protocol. 17, In effect, all off-worlders are to be intercepted. No. Survivors transmit location. When found, Ellen went cold. They know. Tava's claws scraped the metal. They're talking about us, Ryland said quietly. They're talking about the vault. He stared at the screen, jaw locked. Then another message came through a known transmission, not from U.S. signal tag, off-world priority. High panic level, E11. The machine paused. Then the ridge filled with a sudden, piercing sound. A beacon. Someone else was sending their own distress signal, not military, not friendly. Someone trapped, someone scared, someone like them. Tava looked around sharply. There are other survivors. Ryland didn't reply. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, not where the desert lay open. But where it moved, sand shifted near the mid-distance, forming ripples that didn't match the wind. Ryland raised his binoculars and saw them. 8 humanoid figures, suits ragged. Gear scavenged, moving and staggered, its formation across the dunes. They weren't soldiers, they weren't civilians either. They were scavengers, Ryland said under his breath. Local insurgents. Alan blinked. But why are they heading here? Ryland exhaled slowly, eyes steady, because they heard the beacon too. They think it came from us, Tava said. Alan looked horrified. They think we're holding vault tech. They're not wrong, Ryland murmured. Then the worst realization hit. The beacon wasn't meant for rescue. It was bait. Ryland turned sharply to the others. Shut down the comms now. Lynn hesitated. But we just made contact. That wasn't a rescue. That was a trap. Alon froze. Then his trembling hand moved. Switches flipped. Power shut down. The portable comm fell silent, but it was too late. The scavengers were still coming. Hard, fast weapons, drawn in the sand behind them, began to shift with something much larger waking. Under its surface, Tava's voice was sharp. The Sentinel. No, Ryland said, eyes narrowing. Something else. He stood up fully, no longer crouching behind cover, because whatever was coming wasn't coming for the scavengers. It was coming for everyone, and the countdown that had begun in the desert canyon was now accelerating. Not machines, not armies. Something older. Something that had been waiting longer than any war. Something patient, now awakened. Now. Watching now, moving toward them all. The ground beneath the scavengers ruptures. What emerges is not just a machine, it's the vault's first true response. And this time, it doesn't give warnings. The sand did not explode. It sank inward, like a punctured lung. One moment. The scavengers were running across the dunes toward the metallic ridge, shouting through their cracked respirators, weapons raised. The next 2 of them vanished into a sudden crater beneath their feet. No gunfire. No warning. No sound except the rush of collapsing sand. Ryland saw it first. Down. He called out, pulling Alan and Jarrus flat behind the ridge. They didn't argue. They didn't need context. The sound that followed wasn't a machine. Activation, it was something like pressure shifting in the earth, like ancient hydraulics hissing. Awake after centuries of stillness, the scavengers screamed, scrambled, fired, but it was already too late. Something beneath the sand was moving, not just one thing, many metal arms, thin, spined. An unnaturally jointed shot out from the subsurface, skewering sand like a knife through water. 3 more scavengers fell, dragged under without time for a final breath. The remaining 2 froze in terror. Then the sand split, and something monstrous hardened by time. Purpose rose into view. A shape as tall as a dropship, as broad as 2 mech suits, covered in black plates that reflected the light like obsidian armor. Each plate etched with symbols no one on that ridge had ever seen. The thing stood. Its body wasn't humanoid, wasn't symmetrical, wasn't built to mimic anything. Organic. This was a machine built by no civilization the galaxy had ever catalogued. A vault guardian, not the Sentinel, that watched and judged something much worse, something that enforced Alan's Voice broke into a whisper. That's impossible. Rylan didn't blink. It's awake. The scavengers finally fired, an act of terror, not strategy. Their bullets hit the Guardian's plates and dropped like dust. Ineffective. Meaningless. The Guardian's core an orb of shifting geometric. Light pulsed once, then the machine struck. Not with beams. Not with force. With gravity. A wave emitted from its chest, rippling the sand, the rocks. The ear-altering mass just enough that anything not anchored was flung backwards, as though gravity had briefly reversed. The scavengers flew, hit the sand like rag. Dolls did not move again. Silence followed. Silence that felt like a verdict. Delivered. Alan's face had gone ashen. How was that even possible? Gravity isn't something you just use like a weapon. Rylan looked coldly at the machine. Still standing over the decimated sand, it didn't use gravity.
Alan
Stared at him. Confused, it rewrote the rules in one direction and then put them back. Tava exhaled shakily. That's not technology. It's a boundary condition. Alan whispered. A limit. Rylan said. A law. Tava finished. They understood. This wasn't a weapon to win battles. It was a weapon to end them. Rylan looked back at the others. His voice calm, but sharp. We're not fighting that. We're not outsmarting it. We run, now. Aline blinked. But we haven't even sent the distress signal. Rylan grabbed him by the shoulder. We can't. Not from here. That message wasn't just petite. It was a locator. If we send again, every hostile force on this continent will converge on our direction.
Alas.
Tail lashed. And if we stay? Rylan didn't answer. Instead, his gaze drifted back toward the monstrous guardian still standing silent among the displaced sand. Something about it was wrong, not in design, in intent. It wasn't. Looking for a target, it was waiting, watching. The horizon, not where the scavengers had come from, but where the vault still lay, half-dash buried, as if it expected something else to awaken next. Alan followed Rylan's gaze. You think this is just the first? Rylan nodded once. The sentinel tracked us. This one hunted others. Whatever comes next. He didn't have to finish the sentence. They all knew it wouldn't just enforce. It would erase. The crew gathered quickly. The panic beneath their rib cages hidden behind hardened faces. Rylan spoke low, fast, and decisive. Head northeast. We stick to high ground and cross the ravine at first light tomorrow. That gets us to the mineral flats open space. Better visibility, fewer ambush points. Narek frowned. But no cover. Rylan nodded. Better to be seen than buried alive. Alan powered down the cum unit fully, then hesitated. Rylan.
What?
The signal that came through earlier, the one from whoever sent the bait, wasn't just a transmission. Rylan turned slowly. It was a request.
Alan swallowed.
Meaning they weren't asking us to respond. Rylan exhaled sharply. They were asking someone else. Jarrus growled. Who else? Rylan stared into the empty horizon. Whoever built that thing. Silence fell, not from fear, from understanding. The vault was not forgotten. It wasn't lost. It was waiting for the right circumstances to be found. And now, those circumstances were happening. They descended the metallic ridge, step carrying the weight of unspoken dread. The wind picked up. The sand danced across the stone in sheets. The sun dipped lower behind them. The Guardians stepped back into the crater. Not defeated, not damaged, but done. It sank into the earth like a shadow. Withdrawing, the sand swallowed it whole. But the pulse that followed the faint thrum beneath the ground told them everything. This was not rest. This was rearming. The vault had awakened, and the galaxy had not yet realized what that meant. They walked until the sky had burned into dusk, then set up camp between two jagged outcroppings of rust-red stone. Rylan stood alone at the perimeter, rifle at his side, his eyes scanning the night. Alan approached quietly. You ever wonder? He began softly, ... If some things survive, not because they're strong, but because they're meant to. Rylan didn't look at him, but he did answer, I don't believe in chance, you don't? Alan said. Genuinely surprised, Rylan finally looked up at the stars. Not with fear, with quiet reverence. It's not when there are ruins older than memory that still know how to kill. Not when a machine that shouldn't exist can decide what lives and what doesn't. Not when I survive a crash that everyone else died in. He paused, a faint ache in his voice. Something wants me alive. Alan looked at him not like a scientist, like something more. In all the years I've known humans, he said softly, I've never understood how you endure what the universe throws at you. He hesitated. ... Until now. Alan didn't smile. Didn't soften. He just said the one thing he'd never admitted aloud. When the universe is that big, you either see randomness or intention. Alan blinked slowly, and you see intention. Rylan watched the stars a moment. Longer than nodded. Always have. The desert wind shifted, and for just 1 second, a small pulse traveled up Rylan's boots. He froze, looked down, the sand beneath him. Vibratd. Heartbeat, not loud, not strong, but there and very, very alive. The vault's presence spreads beneath the desert. The crew reaches the mineral flat sand, finds they are not alone. The last guardian activates. And this time, the judgment is not about threat. It's about truth. Dawn came without comfort. The desert was colder than the night before, as if the very temperature had recoiled from what had awakened beneath its surface. The wind moved in irregular currents, carrying sand not sideways, but upward, like the ground was beginning to breathe, or tremble. The crew packed quickly, and without unnecessary words. No one asked if they were being followed now. Everyone knew they were. Rylan took point again. But he didn't march with silent certainty anymore. There was something else in his posture now. A weight behind his gaze. It's not fear. Not hesitation, burden. They reached the mineral flats by mid-morning, wide expanse where the sand began to thin and crack, giving way to polished stone and metallic veins that glinted beneath the harsh daylight. There was no natural cover except the slight dips and rises of eroded formations. But you didn't come here to hide. You came here to be seen. Set the array down there, Rylan said, pointing to a platform of iron-rich rock that formed a naturally elevated shelf. We'll get the best transmission angle from this height. Alan crouched and readied the comm unit. We can try one burst short, encrypted, straight to the Federation relay net. If anyone's listening, they'll hear it. Tava tested wind direction with her fur. And if someone else is listening? Rylan's voice was calm. They already are. Alan hesitated, fingers trembling. Before I send this, I need to ask. Rylan didn't turn. He was scanning the horizon through his scope. Ask. Alan's voice was thin. What do you expect to happen next? Rylan didn't speak for a moment. The silence stretched like a blade between them. Then he answered, I think we've been reacting this whole time. Running, surviving, watching what wakes up behind us. But the vault, the machines, it's not just reacting. It's recording. Alan blinked. Recording what? Rylan finally turned, locking eyes with him. U.S. Alan's hands froze over the cum. He understood not the logistics, the intent. The vault didn't want to stop them. It wanted to see them, react to them, judge them, the sentinel that followed them, the guardian that enforced death. All of it was happening for one single reason: observation. Tava crouched low, ears twitching. Then what happens when it finishes? Jarrus muttered something under his breath in Sarikian. It wasn't a prayer, it was the absence of one. Rylan spoke softly. Maybe that's the real decision point. Maybe we don't get to decide how this ends. He paused. But maybe we get to decide what it sees. Alan swallowed, then powered on the cum. Ready? He whispered. Say the word. Rylan? Rylan nodded once, and the message flashed, once compressed, encrypted. Pulsed outward through the metallic terrain like a ripple of light. Transmission sent. Mess signal. Holocompressed relay. Local space status. Activulon let out a breath, then froze. Inbound response detected. Rylon leaned in. No way? That fast? Alan stared at the message. No. This isn't the Federation. Another line appeared. Coordinates. Matched. Location confirmed. Intercept en route. ETA. 14 seconds. Jarrus spun. They're coming here? Who? Tava demanded. Alan's voice was hollow. Someone who was already watching the relay net. The ones who set the trap signal. The Vault Hunters. Rylan lifted his rifle. Positions. The crew scattered. Taking what little cover the stone formations gave them, the air, emony, the wind stopped, then shadows flickered across the flats. Not ships, not soldiers, drones, 5 of them silent. Disc-shaped assault drones gliding low to the ground, black as obsidian with underslung rail emitters. Scanning heat signatures as they moved, they're autonomous. Alan said. No, Rylan corrected. There. Slaved, he pointed beyond the drones toward the horizon, where a hover transport was approaching fast, and behind it a second one, and a third. Not a convoy of scavengers. Not local. Militia know these were military. ROPs. Unmarked. Unregistered. Untraceable. The kind of soldiers who didn't exist on maps. Tava's voice was thin. We can't fight that. Rylan didn't blink. We're not here to fight. And then the ground beneath their feet pulsed. Not subtle. Not gentle. A shockwave, followed by a sound like grinding stone. Rising beneath the metallic flats, the drones stopped mid-dash air. So did the transports. Everyone machines. And people froze. Rylan looked down again, and this time, the pulse matched something he'd felt before, like a heartbeat, like countdown. Sand shifted. Stone cracked, and from beneath the metallic ground, a new machine began to rise. Not a sentinel. Not a guardian. Something else. Something. All dash encompassing the metal plates around the formation folded back like mechanical petals. Gone were the segmented limbs and weaponized frames of the other 2 constructs. This machine had no limbs at all. It was a sphere, massive, smooth, black, covered in layered rings of shifting, metallic glyphs, like a planet of manufactured stone. Alan staggered backward. That's not a weapon. Rylan stood utterly still. Yes, it is. Alan's voice cracked. What kind? Rylan answered without flinching. One that decides whether we're worth keeping. The sphere hovered. Not on thrusters. Not on magnetic lift. It simply rose as if gravity was no longer binding it. The black surface of the sphere shifted. One ring of symbols beginning to rotate. Then another. Then another dot. Each rotation tightened like a lens, adjusting not to fire, to see. The drones aimed their cannons at it, but did not shoot. The dropships held position doors open. Soldiers ready, but no one moved. Everyone was now a subject, not a combatant. Tava whispered, "What is it doing?" Rylan stared at the sphere as its rings began to slow. It's scanning. Gosh, Jarrus trembled. Scanning for what? Rylan spoke quietly, a strange calm in his eyes now. The one thing machines can't predict. Tava turned to him. What's that? Rylan barely breathed the answer. Choice. Suddenly beams of blue-white light shot outward from the sphere, forming 5 intersecting columns that washed over the desert like a shimmering grid. Every machine, every soldier, every scrap of exposed metal was coated in a thin layer of projected energy. The drones flickered, then shut. Down, instantly, silently. The dropships lost lift and began to descend without engine failure, gently, like someone was lowering them by hand instead of gravity. The soldiers inside panicked, but their rifles fell dead in their hands. Their comms went quiet. their visors. Failed, their tech bowed, because the sphere didn't need to. Attack, it dismissed. Alan stared in awe. It's shutting down everything that uses artificial power. Jarrus gripped the rock beside him. But our gear, our water units, our weapons, they're still on. That's because Ryland said softly, it's not shutting down everything. Alan looked at him. What's it sparing? Ryland's eyes drifted down to his own hand, to the metal canteen he carried bare. Simple, human, anything that wasn't built to dominate. Alan exhaled. So how does it decide? Ryland met his gaze. By watching what you do when you know. You're not in control? Alan went still. The sphere floated lower. Scanning rings paused, and for one moment it turned toward. Ryland, only him, as if waiting, as if asking, will you fight what you can't defeat? Or will you decide something else? Ryland didn't move. He simply lowered his weapon, and the sphere responded, its rotating layers stopping all that. Once the light faded, the pulse stopped, the machine settled. Into the ground again. Fully retracted. Fully. Silent judgment rendered. Not on force, but on restraint. Silence after was unbearable. Then at last, Tava spoke. Why didn't it kill us? Ryland exhaled. Maybe it wasn't here to decide who dies. He looked out at the horizon, where the ruined ships now lay still. Stripped of power and purpose, maybe it was here to decide who lives. The desert wind picked up again, and this time, there was no pulse beneath it, no tremor, just the soft whisper of dust and time. Ryland watched as the sphere disappeared, swallowed once more by the earth. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. You don't bury power like that, because you're afraid of who might use it. He paused. You bury it because someday, someone might be ready to understand it. Alan looked up at the stars that were still barely visible in the daylight. You still think this wasn't an accident? Ryland didn't smile. He didn't need to. No, he said softly. I think someone wanted us to live.